I had a dream the night that Daniel was kidnapped. And the dream was that he was in some kind of a troubled situation. And he was very scared. He felt like he's going to die, the way I saw in his face.
The September 11 attack on the World Trade Center was an act of war and terror. One of the world's most distinguished newspapers, the Wall Street Journal, is based just across the street.
John Bussey of the Wall Street Journal is in the area. Let's go to John.
There are gaping holes in the World Trade Center. This is the most horrific scene I've ever seen. Bodies have begun falling from the building.
Oh my God.
There is such intense smoke. People either are falling or they are leaping to escape this smoke. It is as horrific as you would imagine.
In its aftermath, every media outlet mobilized its reporters to find out who was behind it. Daniel Pearl of the Wall Street Journal was already based in Asia. Hours after the Twin Towers fell, he began tracking the story until he became part of it. This is the story of a passionate journalist and a shrewd terrorist, a reporter who happened to be Jewish, and the Islamic Jihadi who set him up for slaughter. Spent his formative years in Los Angeles. He grew up in Encino in a tightly knit Jewish family with two sisters and high-achieving academic parents. His father is a computer science professor and his mother a software engineer.
Danny was interested in everything, and this was from childhood. His interest in music, his interest in cooking, his interest in soccer. We have a diary of him when he was 10 years old, and his sister counted 10 activities that he was doing at the time.
He, played soccer and he played violin. That was the other main aspect of Danny, was constantly practicing his violin and involved in music in any way he could be.
I remember vividly sitting by the piano, 4.5 years old, reading music. Music came before reading to Danny.
That's my advice to you. Never give it up. No matter what you do, you'll never quit it. No matter what you do.
He was trained as a classical violinist. And even in high school he was thinking that, about the possibility of him becoming a professional violinist. And eventually he changed to country music, to fiddle, to to mandolin.
Welcome back to the Off the Beaten Track Radio Hour. My name is Todd Mack, and I'm your host this and every Thursday from 10 to 11 p.m. right here on WKZE 98.1 FM. Tonight we are showcasing the music of Danny Pearl.
No doubt Danny could have made a living as a musician, and a good living, I think, because of his classical training and his love of so many different styles of music and his ability to absorb that and incorporate that into his playing. He was incredibly versatile.
But eventually he decided he wants to be a journalist.
He started a newspaper at Stanford, which is still in existence. It's called The Commentator, and possibly that was the experience that tilted him into journalism.
At Stanford University, Daniel developed an interest in international issues and began to travel and explore human rights.
American Jews don't know what they can do to help. And they write letters, and they don't know what else that they can do.
Nobody knows it.
Danny came to the paper, I think around 1990, from the Berkshire Eagle, a good small paper in the mountains of Massachusetts, and he was a hit from the beginning.
Journalist Azra Numani, a Muslim woman, worked with him at the Journal.
He was definitely unorthodox. I mean, I think he was the first Wall Street Journal reporter with a ponytail, and he always wore the craziest ties. I was the Muslim daughter of India. He was Jewish son of Israeli father, family that had made its roots now in Israel. But we, it was never a dividing line between us.
In London, Omar Sheikh, another young man, was also being brought up in a middle-class suburb. He was 10 years younger than Daniel, a Muslim and of Pakistani origin, but born and brought up in Britain. His father owned a garment business. Omar studied at an elite English private school.
Omar stood out. We do have dozens of pupils, of course, passing under our spell, as it were, every year. But Omar stood out partly because of his physical presence, although he was never intimidating, partly because he was, as it were, an old English gentleman in many respects. His manners were impeccable.
I was in the year below Omar at school. He was known as the hardest, the toughest guy in the school. And he would get into fights with boys sort of, 3 years older than him, and win. I mean, he was a tough cookie.
We gave him a scholarship, 11+, which indicates, of course, that he was a fairly bright young man here.
So he was sort of top of the school, but he certainly wasn't the model student that you'd kind of imagine.
Omar also did rather well outside the classroom in other fields. He was, for example, the London Prep School's champion at chess for 2 years running.
He sees life as a big chess play. If you are a little Freudian, you must know that his mother bears the name of the goddess of chess in Greek mythology, Kaisa.
And he was obsessed with strength. He would work his arms out all the time because he was obviously involved in arm wrestling and things like that.
I saw some footage of young Omar Sheikh in English pubs. He's an arm wrestler, mad of that, fond of that. In the smoke, with the noise, with so much hatred on his face against these young English boys. A mixture of hatred and love with this England, this Western world.
It's very strong, what we call it, inside hook, where the wrists go in and you hook like that. He was very good in that position.
So basically when you're arm wrestling, just make sure you don't get into the hook position.
I think he is very, very dominated by a desire to control his immediate environment, his circumstances. And chess and arm wrestling, both in a certain way, one intellectually, the other one physically, two sides of the same coin of a very controlling person.
It's the mid-90s and Daniel Pearl is emerging as a journalist of great promise and potential. His bosses reward him by giving him his first foreign posting. He is transferred to London as a correspondent for the Middle East. For the next few years, he travels and writes extensively about an area in which he has a growing interest.
He had a reputation here in the U.S. as Danny of Arabia because in his coverage of the Middle East, people knew him as a guy who wrote about Islamic culture all the time, had a great deal of sympathy for Iran and the plight of people around the world, especially Muslims in the Middle East.
So he loved Iran and he didn't feel that there is any animosity toward him for being either American or a Jew.
He goes there 13 times.
He was excited about learning about Islam, about discovering new kind of people that we thought about them one way, and here he discovered another way.
U.S. missiles have destroyed the Al-Shifa pharmaceutical factory in northern Khartoum. The Clinton administration has accused the factory of producing chemical weapons for Osama bin Laden. Reports are still coming in.
Daniel Pearl's reports often challenge official U.S. government statements.
After the Al-Qaeda bombing in Khartoum, U.S. forces took out this factory. Well, Danny went flying in there and spent weeks poking around the soil, looking for evidence to either support or knock down that theory. In the end, he came to the conclusion that the evidence was very scant to support that theory and wrote a story saying just that.
This was totally against the American party line, and the government was furious at this story.
Daniel Pearl and Omar Sheikh share similar privileged backgrounds, but as Daniel strives to explain the Islamic world to his skeptical American readership, Omar begins withdrawing from secular British culture and embracing militant Islam. They were on separate paths that would later collide.
Carrying an effigy of Salman Rushdie, it was at Westminster, under the shadow of Parliament, that in front of the cameras they made their point. Effigy was
It's the late 80s. Muslim students in Britain are coming under the influence of Islamic groups whose religious fervor has been ignited by Ayatollah Khomeini's fatwa on the writer Salman Rushdie. He is accused of insulting the Prophet Muhammad. There are burnings of his book, The Satanic Verses, throughout Britain. An aggressive brand of Islam emerges, unchecked and unchallenged, with dangerous implications for British society. In late 1992, Omar is admitted to the prestigious London School of Economics to study applied mathematics and economics. By the early 90s, Muslim student organizations are seeking new recruits at campuses such as this one at the University of London. Omar is influenced by these events.
He comes from a rich family, wealthy, very well educated, going through one of the best English high schools, London School of Economics. A perfect product of the encounter of Islam and Western world. This is a mystery of Omar Sheikh.
In the same year, Omar and a few of his classmates are instrumental in establishing a prayer room for Muslim students in the basement of the LSE. This new sense of Islamic identity soon has a cause: the war in Bosnia. With its savage ethnic cleansing and the massacre of Muslims, while the West looks on.
He, in a sense, was on the cusp of that wave of indignation, that feeling for the first time of identity as a Muslim amongst these young British Muslims. And that led him in taking the decision, with his family's consent, to travel to Bosnia to offer relief to an extremely imperiled community of Muslims right in the heart of Europe.
One time he said to me that when there was a war in Bosnia, he said that he'd like to go out there and just help out, see what he can do, because he just feels helpless.
He clearly came into contact with a number of the Arab fighters who had recently been in Afghanistan and Pakistan and had come to fight alongside the Bosnian Muslims against the Serbs. Some of those fighters are the people that told him he should move off to Pakistan as quickly as he could and get military training and really become a serious jihadi.
Rather than continue his studies, Omar goes to Pakistan and Afghanistan for military training. He goes all the way, becoming a warrior, a professional jihadi.
He joined an organisation known then as Harakat al-Mujahideen, one of the most prominent of the jihadi organisations, fighting primarily in Kashmir at that stage against the Indians. Omar Sheikh was given a mission to travel to India by senior figures within the Harakat al-Mujahideen organisation. They were very concerned about one person in particular, a man known as Masood Azhar, who was a very prominent jihadi and was in prison in India. The idea of sending Omar Sheikh there was to take some prisoners and effectively use them as a bargaining chip for the release of Masood Azhar. He did exactly as he was instructed, almost nonchalantly. And the remarkable thing about it is that all the people he kidnapped in India, none of it was done through violence. It was all done through him convincing them to get into a car with him. And at that point, one of his accomplices would pull out a gun and the person would be kidnapped. As a result of a search of the area, the police then found some of the hostages.
The hostages are rescued in a shootout and Omar Sheikh is wounded.
Omar Sheikh was taken to hospital, lying in his hospital bed still. He gives his first public interview, one of the most extraordinarily arrogant interviews that you can possibly imagine. This man has no remorse, no concern, no regrets.
You're a Punjabi, basically. Not exactly. I mean, I have some. But I mean, let's say I'm a British national.
Do you regret whatever you have done?
No.
But there is one subject he will not discuss, his relationship with Pakistan's intelligence machine, the Inter-Services Intelligence, or the ISI.
For an English citizen, when he was in jail, he did not receive so many visits of the English consul, but he received regular visits of the military attaché of the Pakistani embassy. He was a man of ISI.
While Omar Sheikh is in prison in India, Daniel Pearl is living in London and often spends time in Paris on his way to and from the Middle East. On one of his trips, he meets a French journalist who is to become his wife. Her name, Marianne Van Neyenhoff.
I was born in Paris. My mother's Cuban, my father's Dutch. I'm a Buddhist. You know, it was just like all this exotic stuff. And I think when he met me, you know, it was just a reflection of his desire to be this universal person. I met Danny in a party in Paris. It was a birthday party and I was dancing with my mother. And I guess he liked that. And my mother's Cuban, so we're good dancers. Went to see him in London, and you know, and I went to pick him up at the Wall Street Journal at his office, and you know how the Wall Street Journal has, like, you know, this cubicle like that, and all the reporters have their little thing, and then he had his, but I get into his little cubicle, and you know, I see this big scroll of the Ayatollah Khomeini, you know. I mean, that's like, you know, it's a scene in the journal, because everybody else doesn't have that kind of stuff. So that first weekend, he had planned this crazy bike trip in Kent. You know, it was like one surprise after the other. It was like no one I ever knew, you know, really. And that's when, you know, that's when we really clicked. He came and visited me in Paris, and then we never separated again.
Daniel and Marianne are soon married.
You know the writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry wrote The Little Prince. He wrote, love is not to look at each other in the eyes, but to look together in the same direction, you know. And that's exactly, I think, what was the glue, you know, of our relationship.
This is the ketubah, which is the contract of marriage. It is in 3 languages, in Hebrew, in French, and in English. Marianne Van Nijnoff and Daniel Pearl entered into the following covenant. We promise to grow old together while keeping each other young, maintaining our sense of humor, sharing love and secrets. We promise to discover new things, places, and people together. We promise to share our happiness with our friends and relatives. We promise not to let money, lack of money, or passage of time change us.
In prison in India, Omar Sheikh is all but forgotten until the hijacking of an Indian Airlines flight in December 1999. The hijackers demand that the Indian government release militant leader Masood Azhar, as well as his disciple, Omar Sheikh. They force the pilot to fly to Kandahar in Afghanistan. The hijackers demonstrate they mean business by cutting the throat of one of the passengers, a newly married man on honeymoon with his wife.
The Indians very rapidly gave in, and in fact decided to fly Azhar and Omar Sheikh and the other prisoner directly to Kandahar on an Indian government aircraft. There appears to be direct collaboration between the Taliban forces on the ground and the people actually carrying out the hijack on the aircraft.
Agents of ISI were in Kandahar on the airstrip where the plane was blocked. They were negotiating with the terrorists, with the Indians who came with Omar Sheikh and 2 others to make the exchange. ISI was there.
The Pakistani authorities ensured that the hijackers were immediately released from Taliban custody and were enabled to make their escape. One of the first things they did was to meet with Osama bin Laden, who was certainly in Kandahar, in that region at the time. He welcomed their freedom. But shortly after that, certainly, the free prisoners make their way to Pakistan, and within a day or two, Masood Azhar gives an extremely important speech. Omar Sheikh was on the fringes of that meeting and taking it all in. And the real question is, how do you use a man like this? This is a planner, a thinker, somebody that they need at the heart of the organisation. He begins to play more of a backroom role, but a very important role within both Al-Qaeda and the sort of Taliban milieu.
At the end of 1999, the Wall Street Journal promotes Daniel Pearl to bureau chief in India. Daniel and Marianne moved to Bombay.
Being Southeast Asia bureau chief, it's a plum assignment that goes only to our most talented and successful reporters.
Daniel Pearl is soon doing in India what he did on other assignments. exploring the local culture, interacting with people of different backgrounds, playing music.
I first met Daniel Pearl when I was playing at Indigo one night. I said, if you have your instrument now, we're doing this blues tune. Right now, you can get into playing with us straight away without a rehearsal. And surprisingly, he pulled out his electric violin, connected it to the amplifier, and played beautifully without a single rehearsal.
Danny's assistant called him on the phone and she said, put CNN on, and we did. And we saw the second plane hit the World Trade Center, the second tower.
A day later, Daniel and Marianne fly to Pakistan on the trail of Al-Qaeda.
It was a very strange experience to go get on a plane on the September 12th. We did. The whole world is in shock, and we're in shock, and everybody's in shock, and we don't know where the danger is coming from.
By that time, Pakistan had thousands of journalists. They had at least 2,000 journalists. They were all trying to get into Afghanistan. Danny had decided that he wasn't going to join that pack. He was trying to get into the network of terrorism. He was trying to figure out how Al-Qaeda was financed.
He starts tracking sources right away and finds an ex-ISI man reputed to have met Osama bin Laden and who knows the jihadi groups intimately.
I got him an interview with the counselor of Taliban, so he did interview him in front of me. And I asked somebody to help him out, so I think most of his contacts which he got in Pakistan were through me.
Daniel begins exploring possible links between Pakistan and the financing of terrorist groups.
There was one thing that we'd learned as Wall Street Journal reporters, and that was follow the money. Always follow the money. Somehow somebody was financing the terrorists. Danny knew that that was a critical story.
Omar Sheikh is also spending time in Pakistan. He is now a suspected Al-Qaeda operative who specializes in kidnapping. The Pakistan that Daniel Pearl and Omar Sheikh move in and out of is not an ordinary country. It's a nuclear power.
2, 1, ignition.
Created as a state for Muslims after India was partitioned in 1947 following the largest cross-migration of peoples in our time, it has been ruled by the military for most of its history, with 3 competing power centers: the armed forces, long allied to the United States, the Pakistani ISI intelligence, which is almost a state within a state, and the street, where the mosques and the Islamic militants wield their power.
I would strongly urge any nation in the world to reject terrorism, expel terrorists. I would strongly urge the Taliban to turn over the Al-Qaeda organizers who hide in their country.
To many in Pakistan, this sounds like a declaration of war against Islam.
More than 2 weeks ago, I gave Taliban leaders a series of clear and specific demands. None of these demands were met. And now, the Taliban will pay a price.
When America declares war against Osama bin Laden and sends its troops to capture him and its bombers to wipe out Al-Qaeda, President Musharraf faces an acute dilemma, deciding to align himself with the United States.
My dear countrymen, Assalamu alaikum.
Musharraf's authority is soon challenged by a dangerous coalition of Islamic extremists, including Omar Sheikh's mentor, Maulana Masood Azhar.
ये हमारा मुल्क है, यहाँ किसी और की बात नहीं चलती। हम उस सलामती कौंसिल का हर हुक्म नहीं मानेंगे, जहाँ मुसलमानों की एक सीट भी मुस्तकिल तौर पे मौजूद नहीं है।
Islamic scholars who run the madrasas, the religious schools which are said to produce many of the militants, are outspoken in their condemnation of the US and Israel.
असल बात यह है कि यहूदी इस वक्त दुनिया पर तसल्लुत कायम करने के लिए जो इक़दामात कर रहे हैं अमेरिका की छतरी के नीचे या अमेरिका के उन्वान के नीचे, उन इक़दामात के नतीजे में मुस्लिम दुनिया के अंदर, मुस्लिम नौजवानों के अंदर नफरत पैदा हो।
नया असला कैसे आया? तो जो बात उनके इल्म में है,
The former ISI chief, General Hamid Gul, argues that the Americans are trying to weaken Pakistan and the Muslim world.
असल हदफ ये है कि जिहाद को बंद कराना है और पाकिस्तान को न्यूक्लियर सलाहियत से महरूम करना है।
Pakistan being a nuclear state and Pakistan having very clear historical, if nothing else, ties with the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda movement, did Pakistan or did nuclear scientists in Pakistan share nuclear devices with terrorists?
A few days before his abduction, Wall Street Journal, it was an article about the risks of nuclear proliferation, dissemination from Pakistan towards rogue states and maybe Al-Qaeda.
The Wall Street Journal runs Daniel's story on page 8. Pakistan's leading nuclear scientist will later admit selling top-secret technology on the black market to countries hostile to the United States.
Have you been debriefed?
Daniel has been working on another important story. In a daring scoop, he reveals that General Musharraf's regime will not or cannot crack down on Islamic radicals openly preaching rebellion in Pakistan. He reports that one of the supposedly banned leaders who appeared in public with an anti-Western message of hate is the same militant who had been freed with Omar Sheikh by the hijackers, Maulana Masood Azhar, Omar Sheikh's mentor. In effect, he is saying that Musharraf is unable to maintain law and order in Pakistan.
There is no doubt that Danny was, into a question, was pursuing a question that was a big trouble for Pakistan. There is no doubt about that.
Foreign reporters are being carefully monitored by the government in Pakistan, but the militants too may be aware of Daniel Pearl's probing. He is possibly becoming a marked man.
Richard Reed, a British national, was detained by the security authorities in the United States this morning. Reed was overpowered by flight attendants and passengers as he tried to detonate explosives hidden in his shoes.
Following up on the Reed story, Daniel Pearl begins looking for a religious leader called Sheikh Jilani.
It was possible that this man was Richard's spiritual leader.
This Mr. Jilani, the biggest number of his followers are not in Pakistan in general, but are in America.
To reach Jilani, Pearl turns back to Khalid Khaja, who is a known Jilani disciple.
I said, he will not be available. Sorry. He was just requesting to me again and again. I said, look, Daniel, when I'm telling you something, just listen to it. He is not willing to come for an interview.
But Daniel Pearl is determined to get an interview with Sheikh Jilani, whom he suspects of running Al-Qaeda's Hawala, a grassroots method for transferring money without bank records that may have helped fund the September 11th attacks.
He kept on calling me the whole day after every 1 hour. I said, Daniel, don't call me. I'll call you whenever I'm free. I called him at about 9 o'clock. I said, okay, if you can come now to my office, you are welcome. He said, can I come in 1.5 hours? I said, no, I will sleep then. So next day he again called me in the morning. He said, can I come now? I said, sorry, I'm busy now. This was the last call I received.
In the process of poking around and spreading the net for folks who might know Jelani, he spread the net pretty widely and went into the jihadi community to see if there was anyone there. A fellow named Bashir came to his attention.
It seems like a breakthrough.
A meeting occurred in Rawalpindi in a hotel, and Danny interviewed this person, supposedly a disciple of Sheikh Jelani.
Bashir, he doesn't have a beard. He's wearing jeans. He's looking completely non-threatening. He's looking like the last thing from a jihadi that anyone would suspect.
Although a cautious reporter, Daniel Pearl has no inkling that Bashir is actually Omar Sheikh.
Bashir was the alias that Omar Sheikh was using. He had come to this interview because he had heard that there was an American reporter asking questions about Jelani. And he was looking in the back of his mind for a way to embarrass Musharraf. Musharraf was cracking down on the jihadi groups, many of which Omar Sheikh had relations with. An American had dropped into his lap. And so he began to think during the session with Danny in the hotel in Rawalpindi that perhaps a kidnapping would serve his purpose.
But Bashir doesn't rush things. For 11 days, he and Daniel exchange increasingly friendly emails.
All this time, Omar Sheikh is spinning out this confidence game and beginning to set in motion the various teams of people that he'll need to kidnap this American. Toward the end of the email string, about the 10th or 11th day, Omar Sheikh says, I have some good news for you. I've been able to set up this interview for you in Karachi. Jelani will see you. I'll send a car. We'll make all of the arrangements.
The journalist and the jihadi have crossed paths, and a trap is being set for Daniel Pearl.
We had been there for a month, and I was pregnant. So, by January 21st, we went to do a sonogram in Islamabad, and we found out we had a baby boy.
He called us, everybody, each sister separately, to tell us that they found out that it's a boy.
Sunday, January 20th at 10:10 p.m.
Michelle, I wanted you to be the first one to find out if it was a boy or a girl. But I don't want your answering machine to be the first one to find out. I mean, we just went for the checkup. So, anyhow, you have to give me a call. It's 92.
So Marianne and Daniel decide to leave Pakistan after stopping over for a few days in the southern city of Karachi. Here, the Pearl stay with Daniel's friend and journal colleague from his Washington days, Azra Nomani.
He had found that the email address to which Richard Reed had sent an email was an email address that was CyberNet. And CyberNet is an internet service provider in Karachi.
We were tired and cranky and frustrated in terms of work, So then he felt like he wanted to do something significant before he left.
This evening, Daniel is finally to meet Jelani.
I didn't go with him to that interview because I just didn't feel like it, and I was pregnant and I was feeling not well, and I said, okay, no, I'm not going, I'm just tired of it, so I stay home, I wait for you.
I'll never forget the last time I saw him, because it was at the beautiful time in Karachi when the sun has reached its peak. It's late afternoon.
Before going to the restaurant, Daniel seeks out a security briefing at the U.S. consulate.
Danny showed up in my office at 3:30 p.m. I got a very strong sense that he was also a cautious individual, that he was not somebody who would go take risks. During the conversation, he mentioned to me that he had an appointment that night, and that it was with a leader of a fundamentalist group that I was unfamiliar with. Sheikh Gilani was the name of the individual, and the name of the group was Al-Fukra. So I was a little concerned. But he said to me that he was meeting at the village restaurant. And my advice to him had been, if you're going to meet this individual, not knowing the background of the individual or the organization, it should be at a public location. And the village restaurant was a public location on a busy street, and it seemed like the perfect place to meet. He said, well, he's the leader of a madrasa, which is a religious school, and he might want to take me to his school to show it to me. And my recommendation was that he keep to a public place and that he not go to the madrasa if that was what Sheikh Gilani had requested. Even the police don't like to go into them. And there was an Al-Qaeda or a Taliban influence in some of those areas where the madaris were located.
Daniel wants another opinion. He goes to the Karachi Police Citizen Liaison Committee, which specializes in negotiating ransoms in kidnapping cases.
When he came there, he asked me if I knew P. Jilani, and actually P. Jilani was not a known figure in Pakistan at all. And somehow his interview has been fit from Karachi, which seemed rather improbable. A person staying in Lahore, getting an interview in Karachi didn't make sense. But while sitting with me, he got 2 telephone calls, and that's exactly how I came to know that he was going for an appointment after me. You see, when he talked to them, yes, I'm very close to you, I'll be meeting you at 7 o'clock. And then another confirmation came at about, say, 5 to 7 or 10 to 7, you see. And he told him he's coming. Now, he went from here. That was the end of the story.
But we had this habit of calling each other every 90 minutes if we were not together. So I started calling him, and there was the answering machine on, but yeah, and then, pretty quickly I started getting worried.
आपके मतलूबा नंबर से फिलहाल जवाब नहीं आ रहा। बराए मेहरबानी कुछ देर बाद कॉल कीजिए। The number you have dialed is not responding at the moment. Please try later.
When I realized after 2 hours that his phone was still answering machine, I knew something was wrong, because I knew that Danny would have called me. I also knew, and that's just instinct, but I also knew that it had to do with terrorism.
For 6 hours, Marianne is unable to reach Daniel.
I had a dream the night that Daniel was kidnapped. And the dream was that he was in some kind of a troubled situation. He felt like he's going to die. It was a nightmare that I never experienced before. It was the first time that I had such a foreboding nightmare about Danny. And I ran to the computer and I sent him an email asking him, describing the situation. And I wrote in parentheses, terrorist, and I asked him to answer the email. The dream was very likely at the moment that he realized that he was kidnapped. It was 7:20 in the morning in Los Angeles, and it was 8:20 in the evening in Karachi. Of course, he never got that email.
He had left the computer on, and he didn't have any password. And so we immediately went into Outlook, because Outlook was where he had all of his emails. And then we started seeing, these emails from Bashir. He was using a Yahoo address also of No Badmashi, which, I knew immediately was just trickery. Badmash is somebody who is a troublemaker. If Danny had watched enough Bollywood movies, he would have figured that out. But No Badmashi then is somebody who is not into troublemaking.
We had no idea who to call and who was trustworthy and who was not. We definitely had no idea at all.
Increasingly worried, Azra contacts Khalid Haja because he knows Jilani.
He had a sense and a knowledge about Jilani that made me even feel more confident that he would comply with my next request, which was, call Jilani, please, find him for us. find him and tell us if he was supposed to meet with Danny. And if he wasn't, we need to know that.
I said, Mubarak Ali Shah Gilani, since the time I know him, he has never ever visited Karachi. She became a little arrogant and she said, but do something about it. I said, look, Asra, thousands of my brothers and sisters have been kidnapped by your government and killed and kidnapped. And I have so many families to look after where, who have nobody to look after. This man will be looked after by many. So I don't have to bother about it so much.
We'd hear cars going by, we'd hear cars stopping, and we thought that maybe it was Danny. I was still so hopeful.
So what we did, it was call the consulate, and but at 1 o'clock in the morning, they didn't take us seriously.
And Corporal Bailey said, well, ladies, you know, it's interesting, and call back in the morning, you know, call back at 6 a.m. when the regional security officer, Randall Bennett, comes in. We kept waiting till dawn then. I knew when Fajr prayer started, you know, the morning prayer, the azan breaks through the Karachi air, and we were waiting for that moment.
About 10 o'clock, I went over to the house that Danny had been staying at with his wife, Marianne.
He said, okay, call these people, give us name, precise names in the Pakistani police enforcement, people that he trusted, and you know, he took the situation seriously right away.
And we began to look into his notes, his computer data, anything we could find that might give us a lead towards phone numbers of individuals, places that he might go, names and phone numbers, contacts principally. Karachi is the 9th largest city in the world. It's got 14 million people, and probably 95% of the city has the potential for disruption and is problematic. We needed the Pakistani police involved. So we were assigned an intelligence officer and an inspector, a police inspector. And that police inspector headed up an assault team. And we became the working group for the first 4 or 5 days. And following that, FBI agents were also assigned.
My total focus at the time was to find Danny Pearl and find the individuals who were behind it. We were there to tell the Pakistani authorities that we were here to help them in any way possible.
We called the State Department, our Washington Bureau called the State Department to begin the process to energize the bureaucracy in Islamabad to begin the search for Danny.
I have spoken to President Musharraf in Pakistan about the situation, and I know that he is doing everything he can.
The bureaucracy within Pakistan was going to have to play a major role, and I wasn't sure whether I was going to have to shake that tree much harder than we were shaking it.
We are working very vigorously, and we hope to trace those people.
Is he alive?
We feel he's alive. We feel he's alive.
As the first day and the second day and the third day went by, obviously people begin to have thoughts that are less than optimistic. I refused to believe that we weren't going to get him back.
We just couldn't believe that there was no trace of him. And then the pictures came. We were together and the computer was too slow to come down. You can imagine eternity until we could see the picture. And then we identified him right away, and we started crying and laughing because we knew he might be alive.
The pictures of Daniel Pearl with a gun to his head are first sent to the Los Angeles Times. They are then emailed to Marianne and the investigators in Karachi.
I saw this picture of Danny with a gun on his head and a smile on his face, you know, which for me was exactly how I felt. It's just amazing because I remember like laughing and crying at the same time.
Danny was sitting there in a sweatsuit, and a man, all that was visible was his arm, but it had a pistol pointed at Danny's head. So we started working with that, and we started breaking down the picture, trying to identify various components of it.
The Islamic group in Pakistan holding the American reporter Daniel Pearl gave the United States another day today to meet their demands before they say they'll kill him. They said his abduction was just the beginning. They're demanding the release of prisoners from the war in Afghanistan.
The demands that the kidnappers have placed are not demands that we can meet or deal with or get into a negotiation about.
At first, the kidnappers make political demands, but then, in a subsequent message, become more rhetorical and threatening.
We are inside seas, oceans, hills, everywhere. We give you one more day. If America will not meet our demands, we will kill Daniel.
Many of these ransom demands turn out to be fakes, making it harder to trace the emails from the real kidnappers.
His almost religion, I would say, is truth. Is somebody who's like, I never saw him say a lie, you know. In his journalism, I've never seen somebody so honest about, you know, the people. Never has any judgment, you know. And the reason, like, why we're in Pakistan today is because we wanted to know more about the people.
I was there also with 2 FBI agents who were computer technicians. Luck, it was purely luck that they were there at the same time I was. With their help, we were able to find out the IP address and try to find out where this email originated from. And we had the access to the internet providers, Hotmail, Yahoo, here in the United States. But priority number 1 that we did in the beginning was to track down Sheikh Gilani in order to interview him.
Police find Sheikh Gilani. He's brought in for questioning.
I had an opportunity to sit on an interview with Sheikh Gilani. When 15 minutes within the interview, our feelings were that Sheikh Gilani was not involved in this.
It becomes clear that Daniel's alleged meeting with Sheikh Gilani was a setup.
The next day, the picture of Danny is in the newspapers, and there was this article about Danny being Jewish.
The damage was done already regarding coming out that report regarding Danny being Jewish, and it's reflected in, I believe, the second email that we got from, we believe, from the original kidnappers. In the first email, they mentioned that Danny was a CIA agent, and that was the first one. In the second email, they were calling him the Mossad agent.
Azra and Marianne start tracing the mysterious Bashir. Unaware that he's Omar Sheikh, they track down the fixer who had introduced Daniel to Bashir.
Marianne had Asafuki's mobile number. I called him and we talked to him, and he said that Danny asked him to find Gilani. So he called a colleague that he knew at Jung, and this colleague was covering jihadi organizations, just like a Wall Street Journal reporter in the Atlanta Bureau would cover Coca-Cola.
The reporter at Jung newspaper had unwittingly put Daniel in touch with terrorists who were Omar Sheikh's colleagues. A circle of association is slowly coming into focus. A terrorist network is emerging.
As we began to structure the network, we saw cell phones that were used under the name of Bashir. And then that same number was being utilized under the name of somebody else. And people were calling other people, and the relationship started to take shape.
The FBI and the Pakistani police start making progress.
We got our next lead, our best lead, we were able to identify. Primarily, the Pakistani authorities were able to identify a landline that they felt one of the emails was hooked up to.
One of the emails had an IP address on it that we traced back to a particular server location an internet cafe, and we identified one particular server within that cafe.
They identified an apartment building which had approximately 80 units in it, and one of those units they were fairly confident that a computer in one of these apartments was where one of the emails were sent out from.
So in truth what we had to do was monitor that server and wait until the next email came and identify that it matched up with the same user number as the others. And within, I think it was 24 hours, the next message came, and it tracked back to a specific apartment in that building. The first move was, we raided that apartment building and captured a young man and confiscated his computer equipment, but he had, he thought, cleansed or he had purged his hard drive.
FBI computer technicians were able to locate fairly quickly on his laptop photographs that were used on the first original email.
And through their technological magic, they reconstructed the parts that remained, and one of the things that came out was one of the photos of the man with the gun pointed to Danny's head. So we knew we had our first solid lead. That interrogation led to another one, and led to another capture, and led to another capture. We've grabbed number 2 and we're racing down the alley to get back out again as quickly as we can. Individuals had, well, they were still awake. They saw what was happening, and there was some gunfire. There were some cars lit on fire at the end of the alley to try and block our path, but we were moving pretty quickly, and the plan was pretty well structured in advance. When we began the raids that night, we knew that we had to complete the entire circuit by the first prayer of the day, which was about 5:30 in the morning. Because once the people went to the mosques, the word would be out that our investigation was getting close to the people, and that we'd picked up some individuals, and we knew that those that we had not obtained up to the point that the sun came up would go underground. We captured the principal 4 people that had been responsible for the planning of the kidnapping and the emails.
Randall and the investigating team are about to discover that Bashir and Omar Sheikh are one and the same person.
Then through the questioning of the individuals that we now had in captivity, we learned that Bashir was actually Sheikh Umar.
Omar Sheikh, alias Bashir, or Sheikh Omar as Randall calls him, now holds the key to finding Daniel alive.
We were able to identify Omar Sheikh as the individual who authorized the kidnapping.
I put his name into Google, and Marianne was sitting next to me then, and I was like, look at this. And it was so awful, that moment then.
That man had already kidnapped foreigners in India. The man who had been exchanging emails with Danny, and who had met Danny in Rawalpindi, was Omar Sheikh.
And then we got this picture, and it was a picture on the AP of Omar Sheikh. The police had done a drawing of Omar from Asif Faruqi's descriptions, and we put it up on our chart, like right next to each other, and they looked identical.
A hunt is now on for Omar Sheikh. Meanwhile, President Musharraf has arrived in Washington, where he claims Daniel is still alive. He appears confident. One of the men picked up in the police raids turns out to be a cousin of Omar Sheikh. His mobile phone has Omar's number.
Captain, as he told us then that next morning, picks up the phone and tells Omar, because now he knows that it's Omar Sheikh from his cousin, tells him, I know who you are. I know what you've done. Omar is startled and then hangs up the phone. Then, February 12th, we got this amazing, visit from Captain, and that Omar Sheikh had been found.
Sheikh Umar turned himself in to authorities in Lahore.
And he's being brought to Karachi.
अमेरिका दबाने वाले डॉलर बेच दो अपने
Don't like this. Please.
दबाने वाले अमेरिका अपने डॉलर बेच दो
Please. If we are cooperating with it,
Marianne started daydreaming about where she would take Danny to recover. The White House called offering, this C-130, and they were going to take him to a military base in Germany for recuperation. The truth came out that, in fact, he'd been picked up on February 5th, that as soon as the police had contacted him and started picking up his family, he had gone to a man that he trusted would protect him.
Incredibly, for a whole week, Omar Sheikh has been in the custody of the Pakistani intelligence agency, the ISI, unknown to the Pakistani police, which had publicly mounted a huge manhunt for him.
He was like the main ISI person at the time, and he became the governor of the Punjab province, and he handed himself over to him, his ex-ISI contacts.
And he was a former ISI official. Brigadier Josh Shah was his name.
And the time that he was under police control, there was a whole week, and no one knew what happened. President Musharraf was in the United States, and the ISI was keeping this guy, and they doing what they had to do to protect him, protect their sources. That tells you how powerful these people are. Because who would dare, when the two heads of state are together in the same country, keep the main suspect in the kidnapping of an American journalist with the worldwide media attention? Who would dare doing that?
I think the kidnap was enormously embarrassing, and I think it was a huge blow. I mean, potentially it had the power to topple Musharraf himself.
Moderate religious Muslims.
The modus operandi of the terrorists begins to emerge.
When we first questioned Sheikh Umar about where Danny was, he said he had no idea. And he stuck to that throughout, because he compartmentalized his operation.
Omar Sheikh did that purposely. So not everyone knew everybody. So if he caught one of them, all the other ones wouldn't give everybody else up.
There was the group which he had hired, which carried out the actual email. There was another group that carried out the physical kidnapping operation. And then there was another group that held Danny at a location that some of the other segmented groups did not know.
He's done this before. He's an intelligent man. I mean, he's very well educated and a smart man, but a psycho.
First, Omar said Danny was alive, and then he said he was dead, and then he said he was alive.
He actually admitted liability for it. He claimed responsibility as if it had been a successful operation on his part. His justification was simply that it was a jihad against the infidels, against the Americans, and that he wanted to make a point.
He basically said I was the one who thought of it, I was the one behind it, but he was not the one who physically had Danny.
Slowly, Omar Sheikh revealed this idea that Danny was dead because he had called the kidnappers, and they had code language that the patient had died on the operating table and that he was dead.
None of us wanted to believe that Danny was dead. At the end of the 5th week, we received a phone call from an individual who said he had a videotape of the death of Danny Pearl. We arranged to meet him in the lobby of the Sheraton Hotel. We set our people up at tables in the cafe and around so that if this individual came in, we would be able to control the situation. He did show up. He delivered a package. We opened the package, but it wasn't a videotape, it was actually a camera, and inside the camera was a small tape. Since it was a camera and the tape inside the camera, we weren't able to use the hookups. So we all moved from there to my home, actually to my residence, which was about half a mile away. We all went into my living room and carefully hooked the camera up to through my VCR and into the TV. And we played the tape. And at that moment, it was obvious to us that that was Danny and that he was dead.
The tape is horrific. Daniel Pearl has been beheaded. The kidnappers filmed the event for a wider circulation later on video and DVD.
I knew exactly what they had just done, you know, symbolically killed someone, taped that so they can commit an act of terror. It was as clinically an act of terrorism than 9/11 attacks.
My first question on the phone to the consul, American consul in Karachi, are you sure that he's dead? He said, yes. How can you be sure? He said, I can tell you that he's sure, don't ask how. And I said, you mean they cut his head? He said, yes.
I just wanted to know that he wasn't in pain, you know, that that it all happened very quickly.
I started saying, you know, this Muslim prayer that my mother's taught me since I was a kid for protection for Danny. Then the first rains came that I'd ever even myself experienced in Karachi, this like showers. Could start hearing it coming down, and I started weeping, you know, with those rains. Like I, you know, felt like the heavens had opened and angels were crying, and that Danny was there.
Months later, Al-Qaeda operatives bombed the Sheraton Hotel and the U.S. consulate in Karachi. 14 people, including 11 French naval officers, are killed. Over 400 members of extremist groups are picked up and questioned. One man says he knows where the American journalist Daniel Pearl is buried.
This is the place जहाँ ये बॉडी मिली है डैनियल पर्ल साहब की बॉडी यहाँ से ये जो है ये बाजियाब हुई है यहाँ से अब यहाँ से फाउंड हुई है बॉडी दिस इज द प्लेस
Apparently Danny was only held for the first week. He was killed following approximately 7 days of captivity. He was kept on this small compound which had some olive trees and some other fruit trees and some grapevines. And there were a couple of small cinder block rooms where Danny was kept and the actual photos for the email were taken. During that period of time, Danny had apparently made 2 attempts to escape, both times failing to escape. But in interrogating one of the Pakistanis who had actually held Danny at the compound, and he was the one who relayed the final events, the final moments of Danny's life. He said that all throughout that week, their understanding was that at the end of this propaganda, Danny was going to be released.
The empty house belongs to one Saud Memon, a don of the Karachi underworld and a fundraiser for Al-Qaeda. Memon brokered a deal with an Arab terrorist group which wanted to buy Daniel Pearl from the Pakistanis for $50,000. The kidnappers accepted the deal and handed Daniel over to the Arab group. 3 men arrived the next day with a video camera, butcher's knives, and $9,000. The balance was to be collected later. Reports reveal that Daniel told his captors that his wife was expecting, and he sang songs for her and recited her Buddhist chants. His new captors were determined to use Daniel for their terrorist propaganda. He made a statement for the camera.
My name is Daniel Pearl. I'm a Jewish American. I come from, on my father's side, a family of Zionists. My father's Jewish. My mother's Jewish. I'm Jewish.
Then Daniel further asserted his Jewish identity and his family's ties to Israel.
In the town of Bnei Brak in Israel, there's a street called Chaim Pearl Street, which is named after my great-grandfather, who was one of the founders of the town.
After refusing to be forcibly sedated, Daniel Pearl was held down by 4 men and slaughtered. The executioners left, leaving the Pakistani gang to dispose of Daniel's body, which was cut into 10 pieces and buried in the compound in plastic bags. In June 2002, Omar Sheikh and his 3 accomplices are put on trial.
एक दफ़ा ऐसी बात हुई है कि जब हम हाई कोर्ट से वापस ला रहे थे तो किसी ने उनसे सवाल किया था कि किसी जर्नलिस्ट ने उनसे सवाल किया कि जर्नलिस्ट सैकड़ों की तादाद में होते थे, उसमें लोकल मीडिया भी होता था, उसमें फॉरेन मीडिया भी होता था। तो किसी ने बीच में से जब उनसे क्वेश्चन किया कि आपने क्या ये सही किया, तो उन्होंने कहा कि जो कुछ मुझे करना था वो मैंने बिल्कुल सही किया। मेरा ख्याल में तो ये था कि वो तो तकरीबन उस कैटेगरी से भी निकल गए थे जो ब्रेन वॉश वाली कैटेगरी थी, बल्कि वो तो एक इंस्टीट्यूशन की शक्ल उनकी थी कि वो तकरीबन लोगों को वो इस्तेमाल कर सकते थे।
Omar Sheikh is found guilty and sentenced to hang. His 3 accomplices received 25 years each. Omar Sheikh has appealed against the death sentence, but inexplicably, his appeal has been delayed 33 times. Since the trial, several arrests have been made, including that of the mastermind of 9/11 and the alleged number 3 in the Al-Qaeda network, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, now in American custody. Sources in the American administration, Pakistani police, and 2 of the kidnappers in custody claim that it was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed who actually slaughtered Daniel Pearl.
It had something to do with what Daniel Pearl knew, which they did not know he knew, and which they discovered he knew, and which they decided he could not go out knowing it. Was it about Gilani? Was it about the nuclear question? Was it about the ISI Al-Qaeda relationship? The 3 are possible.
My explanation is that they tried to make a point, tried to humiliate the US. The one mistake they made is they bought a camera. That camera associated whatever Danny stood for with America and with Jewishness. It was important for them to convey the message that the US would in some way be punished. And I believe that that was their message, and that was the reason why he was killed.
बात यह है कि दीन पर के कत्ल को किसी आलिम ने जिहाद भी नहीं कहा। आप किसी एक आलिम का मगरिब किसी एक आलिम का नाम हमें नहीं बता सकता है कि उसने दीन के कत्ल की तहसीन की हो, अच्छा कहा हो, या दीन के कत्ल को जिहाद करार दिया हो। नहीं।
And I want to take revenge against the hatred that took his life. I don't direct it against people, I direct it against the hate, and I direct it against the ideology that allowed this hate to ferment to such magnitudes.
After Daniel's death, there was a public display of remorse. Marianne receives hundreds of letters of condolence from around the world. Some of the most moving are from Muslims in Pakistan.
As a Pakistani, I am ashamed of being one today. His unborn son will come into this world hating us. I have no words to say how sorry I am for what happened to Danny. My heart goes out for your family. And now console myself knowing he is happy up there with his creator and looking down and smiling and longing to see his beautiful unborn son.
Marianne Pearl and her boy Adam, the son that Daniel named and who was born 4.5 months after his murder, are living in New York.
Adam doesn't have a father, I don't have a husband. But Omar Sheikh, he has a wife, he has a son. He's in exactly the same position. Omar Sheikh, what a mess we've created, you know.
Marianne has written a book and returned to her work as a journalist.
I see happiness as an act of resistance. And my resistance to bitterness is my resistance to terrorism. And, you know, bitterness will kill me.
Ruth and Judea Pearl and their daughters Tamara and Michelle have set up the Daniel Pearl Foundation for the promotion of interfaith understanding through music and journalism.
We have messages from thousands of people who were affected emotionally by the tragedy. And this is what gives us the hope that there is this undercurrent of decency in the world.
With a cover song, it's called Knocking on Heaven's Door.
In England, the press brands Omar Sheikh the British jackal. His promise as a scholar and a sportsman have gone unrealized. And Daniel Pearl?
You know, he wasn't trying to just get, Pakistan's dirty secrets out. Danny was trying to basically stop the type of hatred and financing of acts of hatred that killed him.
I lost a great friend who always made me laugh. I really miss him. I really miss him.
Danny is buried in Forest Lawn on Sinai. As a kid, he used to play with orchestras, and one of the orchestras played at the chapel there. They had a big chapel where he's buried. And Danny wrote in his diary when he was 10 years old, Mount Sinai is the most beautiful place in the world. And where he's buried, you can see the chapel where he played as a 10 years old in the orchestra. It's kind of comforting to know that he admired the place where he's buried.
Daniel Pearl gave his life for his beliefs as a humanist and a journalist who was committed to the quest for truth and understanding in a divided world.
I'm really happy that we really loved each other a lot, so I know that Danny and I both knew real love, which is not something that everybody experiences, and as short as it was absolutely strong and genuine and powerful.